I'm looking at the time. We did actually have another topic lined up, but I'm thinking what we ought to do instead is, and this one is, should Mars set up a virtual donation mechanism on the website? But I'm thinking that that we're already at 1:45. Why don't we stop here and let's discuss what we just went through. And if I can just summarize, this is really the essence of how consensus-based decision-making ought to work. In that, you know, we thought we had a consensus on something, someone else raised a good point, and we stepped back and said, you know, maybe he's right. And none of that would have happened easily in Robert's Rules. And if you do this often enough, now this is the first time any of you have done this, if you do this often enough, you learn to respect that decision and allow it to play out. And it's really just something like that. Now, we did, who raised that question? Was it John? Who raised that question about the challenge of?
That was me, it was Jimmy.
Jimmy, okay, thank you. So does anybody, we'll get to that question in a minute. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts or whatever about what we just did? So Don, you have your hand up. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, my name is Don. I'm not real familiar with this consensus-based decision making. You know, I'm kind of stuck in Robert's Rules of Order, and I don't even know that really well. But the question I had, you know, I was listening to the vote and everything. In consensus-based decision making, do people have the option to like ask questions? Because we've been talking about these virtual meetings, and you know, I've been doing this thing for a couple of decades, and I really love Narcotics Anonymous. I love the feeling of actually like being with people and you know, doing the personal touch. And I know for myself, you know, we've lost a lot of people because of these virtual meetings, because nothing can really take place of a hug. And I'm just thinking that, you know, I mean, they've been talking shit for a while now. Okay, the vaccine's coming, this, that, and the other thing. But we're talking about these virtual meetings like this is going to be the new norm for NA. And quite frankly, that scares the shit out of me. You know, let's face it, you know what I mean? Sometimes we can be pretty lazy fucking people, you know? If I can go to a meeting and not have to put my pants on, you know what I mean? I'll click on the Zoom rather than hop in my car. So what's going to happen with these, you know, with these virtual meetings, and we're putting all of our eggs in like one basket with this virtual meeting thing. What if, you know, 2021 or 2022 comes rolling along and this virus is like, you know, people don't even really remember it, except for like 2020 was a lousy year. I don't know. What are we gonna do after that? We're gonna still try to keep virtual meetings and stay distant from meetings, and you know, because it's really affecting the area. It's affecting the region. You know, people aren't donating. They're not going. It's, you know, I don't know. There's a lot of concerns on my part. I wanted to see if I could get some answers.
Okay, thanks, Don. Just to step back and talk process, that's a comment you would make really whenever you wanted it. You could either formulate as a question to the topic maker, or in the discussion like we're doing now. In my role as facilitator, I would hear that as a different question. That, you know, from what we're talking about here, it may be related, and that may be something worthy of its own topic at some point, and something to go back to as an ad hoc or something like that. It's a little different from this. So, but so does that make, so yeah, there's always an opportunity to express that point of view, and then it really depends on the facilitator to know, you know, how to handle that best. So that makes sense. Let's see, Jimmy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, and my question's kind of outside of our current discussion, but a part of about how you do your process where you guys are. And you mentioned that anybody could, you tend to do votes on any individual could bring anything up for a vote. And just curious, because our area, you know, we had open forum for that reason to discuss things any individual wanted to bring. But if I was a facilitator for a while, so any topic or motion kind of needed to come from a group the way we did it, simply because if you couldn't get a whole group to vote on it, I don't know if everybody else needed to talk about it as well. In other words, in Robert's Rules of Order, when we were doing that, it came down to one or two personalities on either side, and that was the only voice you ever heard. And the way you do it, you don't have like the one personality coming up to, it's always changing stuff for the entire area, you know, as opposed to groups not having a say in that, if that makes sense. It doesn't sound like that's a problem for you guys, but it has been in our area, and I just would see doing it here, that might be an issue.
It's a great question. I'd like to defer talking about that until we're done with this, because yeah, that's a major question and it does differ between the regions, but we're gonna, after we're done with this, we're gonna talk overall process.
Okay.
Yeah, Lewis,
Mhm.
that's something I wanted to bring up. When you did the votes on that, it was good. I'm glad you did it this way. You asked for yes and no. On the first one especially. You didn't ask for block. And now, if this is an actual example, my area, and I had actually put something in the chat, is a group conscience area that says we don't want any new areas on Mars.
Mhm.
And that's where consensus-based decision-making does not work well in Narcotics Anonymous.
Well, it depends on the form of consensus-based decision-making you're using. If it's 100% consensus, like the Midwest Zonal Forum does, then the block is effective. In an 80% consensus, there is no equivalent to block.
The example I'm trying to bring up really has to do with group conscience.
Yeah.
And there are places that believe, and you're seeing it in Chicago when you even said it, that your groups are really no longer a part of the process.
Mhm.
Well, some people in my region, we would say that's a bad example. That's not good for NA as a whole, because it removes people from the process. They become apathetic after years of never being asked. The second example I want to bring up is because during that thing with the no, you didn't ask for a block. And it was like, I didn't have a chance to raise an objection, and so a procedural objection. And this happens at the World Service Conference. And I see that as being a problem with CBDM at the WSC, is because the facility, if I was raising my card because only to object to the way the facilitator was proceeding, you're still on discussion, and say I'd spoken on the topic. And so because of the discussion queue, I'm never called to even raise that objection on how the process had worked. And that again is just one of the other, just to say that CBDM, while there are benefits to it, it's also not a perfect solution. And especially in NA, it can become problematic when groups want to be a part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Jeff. And it really depends on how your region is structured. You know, having served as RD in the Chicagoland, where I've gone to areas and I've talked to groups and I've tried to find some interest, and I've actually outreach to get interest, they just aren't interested. But yet this can still very much apply to a different kind of region where every decision goes back to the areas and then goes back to the groups before a formal decision is made. So you can certainly do it this way. There's no reason why you can't.
If I may interject a little bit,
yeah.
One of the things you saw was the differentiation, and it worked out very clearly in this concept, in this instance, the differentiation between a straw poll and taking an actual consensus. Straw polls are designed to get a feel for what's going on. Okay, It's not the actual consensus. We're not going through the formal process of an actual consensus. So going with a yes and no in a straw poll makes a big difference. It doesn't end discussion.
No.
It can, in fact, it can further discussion.
Yes. Absolutely. And so now, mind you, because I was sharing my screen, I had to facilitate a little differently than I would, because it's a lot easier to do this when you can see faces and body language and stuff like that. And the way I had it set up, I couldn't. So that's part of it. But yeah, you know, and it really depends on the facilitator. Our new facilitator in Chicagoland, I'm no longer, he did something brilliant at Region. He saw a compromise from the discussion, and it actually involved Laura, believe it or not. Her term was ending in December, but we're not meeting in December. And there was and everyone loves Laura. I mean, if Laura wants to do this for the rest of her life, no one would object to it. You know what I mean? And so the discussion was whether to extend her term. And also our policy requires a flyer to be submitted 2 months ahead of time, which wasn't. And so, there were discussions whether we should delay the election until January and do a flyer, this, that, or the other. And our facilitator heard that, no, let's let her stand for a full year so we don't have to keep this up. And it was just like brilliant. And so yeah, a good facilitator definitely helps in this. And that's part of it. And yeah, so any other comments on what Jeff said or Danny or others, or new comments yourself?
Yeah, I've got my hand up, Louis.
Oh, I'm sorry, Craig, go ahead.
That's okay. I have two things. One, on what Jeff just said is, and what you said at the very beginning, or not the very beginning, when you quoted Sandy and said we are third tradition region.
Third concept,
sorry. But the third concept doesn't actually assume or describe nothing going back. The third tradition talks about actually finding the balance and finding a sweet spot between things being delegated to trusted servants and a service body, versus the other end of that is an area or groups abdicating all of their authority. So it's kind of finding a sweet spot and finding a balance between that. Yeah. That's my first thought. Yeah. The second one is, and I don't know which slide that was, but I had a question about something in a slide where you said, in that slide it said, not you, but in the slide, it said that the facilitator determines which process or something to that effect. And I was wondering, what does that actually mean?
Let me share the screen again and do boop, 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 boop. The facilitator role. Okay. Oh, that's Midwest Zonal Forum. What you're talking about.
Okay, it was one of them. I don't remember.
Yeah, it was the Midwest Zonal Forum, and that's
okay. Determine best way to reach a solution. What does that actually mean? Which ways are he or she, the facilitator, looking at? Which ways are you referring to?
And so what I'm referring to is we get in the NZF, topics emerge during the full weekend, and then before new business, we prioritize them. And many of the topics are repetitive, right? And can be combined. Some of the topics, deal with policy and can be approached a different way. Mm-hmm. Some of the topics, they look at which ones, the best way to handle them in that way, combine them or that something like that. That's what that's referring to.
Okay. All right. It was just a little confusing.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Louis.
That's taken out of the policy. So I was facilitator of the Midwest Zonal Forum 10 years ago, and I don't remember what I did.
Gotcha.
So and Mark had a question or a point. Mark, you're muted.
Okay, I'm not sure that it's a question more than a option. The Orlando area cannot do a block without supporting it with a principle or tradition that whatever the proposal is in conflict with. The one thing that I've been pushing for and haven't gotten for many, many years in Orlando, as well as the Florida region, is that I wish there was a consensus-based decision-making where there is no vote. That if you're going to cast a no vote, you have to cast it with an alternative. And to me, that embodies the first tradition. If we're looking for our common welfare and trying to act in unity, then there has to be a middle ground. And kind of what Craig just said is to look for that balance in things going back to groups and those things that maybe groups have no idea what the best way forward is. So I think that for my part, what I've seen in consensus-based decision making, we're stuck on this yes or no. And I say that generally, not everybody is, but in my experience, we're stuck on yes or no. And that to me is not letting go of Robert's rules. If you're going to vote no, bring me a compromise, bring me the alternative, finish the thought of no. You know, you're not going to get away that easy by just saying no. We want you to participate in the process, and we want you to give us your idea of why you're saying no and what would help us to get to a solution. That was just more of a comment, I guess, than a question.
That's a great question. I'm right now scrolling through the MZS's policy or guidelines, and we may have something like that, and I summarized it and didn't include it. But yet, and anyone who feels vehement can always come up with a principle to support them. You know what I'm saying? So, so yes, I think in principle we do that too. I can't confirm that though right now. But you know, I mean, hey, if you want to block, you can block. It's just.
Don asked from Bay Area. You had a question, some questions because of
Yes. Thank you.
Earlier on, I think
you.
maybe we could go back and have some questions from you, Don, or if you haven't answered any of your questions.
Don?
Don, if you raise your hand so I can more easily find you to unmute you.
Here. And I'm so sorry I didn't get back to your question. Oh, sometimes I'm not the best facilitator.
We have two more hands up also, and then
Don, when you want to come in, I guess raise your hand again. But yeah, we want to get to because your question is an awesome question that is worth and we really need to talk about. All right, Kelly, you have your hand up, and then who else had their hand up? Let's see, and then Dennis had their hand up. And when did Dennis come?
So now that we're all done, I just want to make sure I was role playing. I actually am not that guy. Anyway,
he's the RCM of the polar region.
So what I wanted to kind of blend the Mark's workshop before and then this workshop and show in real world in a real world how this had what I think a positive impact at world level service. It's often a misconception that motions in the car are a far gone conclusion, that they'll pass and nothing can really happen on the conference floor that will sway a motion or a decision one way or the other. It's just a foregone conclusion, rubber stamp. And what I observed during the virtual conference, and it may have been because of that environment this happened, but there was an amendment to the motion, and the amendment of the motion had strong support. It had met the 2/3 criteria to pass. And what I observed was the facilitator asking for dissenters to speak opposed to this amendment. And it was amazing to see that the people that were expressing their points of view and expressing their concerns or their positions had a dramatic effect on that amendment, going from 2/3, 80%, I think it had 80%. And so the co-facilitator in all rights could have just not even asked. It could have been a final decision and moved on. But they did ask for those in the minority to speak. And then we watched as the vote at straw poll started to slide and slide and slide until it was 2/3 not showing support for that amendment. That was a powerful example of consensus decision, and that not everything that meets the 80% criteria is a far gone conclusion, that the voice of the minority can impact these decisions that affect NA as a whole. And I just wanted to share that observation.
Yeah, Kelly, and I actually applied that here. We had a a near unanimous decision to accept the area, but then Mark suggested a process that and I let you, after we had that, I still let you speak, right? And then Mark suggested, well, maybe there's another option here, which turned out to be the right one. And so the purpose isn't to pass a voting threshold; it's to reach a group conscience. And in this case, there really wasn't a group conscience. It needed further discussion once people heard you, and that's a way that people get heard, even if they're not part of the winning side. And so Dennis has said a lot in the chat. Before I go to Dennis, Don, did you want to talk? Did you want to say something? I see Don's there.
No, I'm good. I just had a couple of questions. I just think this is interesting. I've been doing area service for a long time, and I'm just thinking I want to move over to region and see what region's all about. So I jump in here, but I just had a question. I didn't know how the consensus-based decision making worked, and how I was able to pose a question that I had, if it would be answered, or like you said, that's a whole different topic that you would bring up at open sharing.
Well, we don't really have open sharing. It would be actually given its own topic, and so that would then just go on new business as a new topic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this process eliminates the need for an open forum, because topics don't have to be proposals. Like the one that we were going to talk about next wasn't a proposal. It just said, should we go a virtual donation page on website? And what often happens in that situation is a topic emerges from the discussion, and then you can focus on that as the proposal. I mean, a proposal emerges from the discussion, but this process allows, basically incorporates open forum into the actual decision making.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Dennis.
Hey, addict named Dennis. And a lot of what I was going to say is just echoing the chat. But what you just said, that CBDM is less about the decision, more about the conscience. That's actually one of the key points. One of the things that I love about CBDM is you have to shift away from the focus of the decision itself and more on hearing the voices of the group. And like one of the things that I thought was great about earlier was you had almost unanimous. You had only one opposed, so you had almost unanimous 4. And CBDM typically focuses on having enough support to move in a direction rather than a competition between for or against. But it took less people for the work group or the ad hoc to actually initiate that decision. So it's easier to pause a decision to go to a work group unless it's an emergency, time sensitive, whatever. Decisions aren't final and aren't necessarily having to be voted on right then until you have enough of the body in favor of it and all together in that consensus. And that I think that's a beautiful thing. The example I gave with NEZF was when we made a proposal to formalize our ad hoc PR into a standing committee, we had 10 yes, 2 abstain, no opposition. And the 2 abstains were only because the regions hadn't had enough time to really gather their group conscience. The rest of our regions heard that and said, you know what, we want to give you time, so let's table this. Cool. We ended up tabling it for 2 more meetings, and then it was a unanimous decision for yes. But we didn't have to make that decision right there. It was more important to give the regions time to do what they felt they needed to do to participate in the decision-making process. And what Kelly just talked about with World, actually, I experienced that in WC 2018. I think it was motion 15 when we were talking about creating the work group, the additional work group for the zonal meetings. And it started off with near consensus support. And then as the discussion occurred, it dropped a little bit at a time. And it ended up not passing. Now, with Robert's rules, typically whatever vote happens, as soon as that happens, all right, this is the decision. With consensus, the focus becomes less on making that decision and more about, okay, we currently have this level of support. Now let's hear the voices. Now let's hear, and if you have consensus support, let's hear the minority voice. If it's consensus against something, let's hear the people that are for it and why you're for it. And if you're for something, let's hear the people that are against it. And even if it doesn't change the vote, focusing on the minority voice is a very powerful way to allow the minority to feel heard, and feeling heard is the most powerful way of moving a decision or allowing a decision to move forward. That was one of our decisions in our guidelines that it had almost unanimous support, and it was, I think, the RD from New Jersey was opposed almost to the point of blocking it, but he was like, you know what, we asked, what is your opposition to this? We focused on that, and he explained it, and he's like, I hear that the body's for this. I'm okay. I feel heard, and I'm all right with going with the will of the body, having been heard.
Right.
So, like, to answer kind of Jeff and to wrap up everything I was just saying is CBDM isn't like Midwest has a CBDM process, NEZF has a CBDM process. Like, CBDM is less defined process, like Robert's Rules has its book. CBDM is a buffet of options to get to a particular result. It's goal-oriented, purpose-driven. So, like with Midwest, you have your way. NEZF, we adopted the WSC process from 2018. We're still very formal. We have to have proposals for decisions. We're much more formalized on that. But neither way is the right way of doing it. It's just the way that our group conscience of our regions and areas said, this is the way we want to do it. And we follow the principles in it. So that's it.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. We are over time. I hope everyone got their questions answered. And yeah, I definitely agree with that. And one reason why Chicagoland is so the way we are is we've been doing it for so long, people trust it. They trust it. And it's, and so that's, and Laura's nodding her head because, we do trust it. I mean, very, very rarely do decisions at region get challenged. People say, oh, okay, because they know in our process, every consideration was offered. And our meetings usually have, 30 people at them. We have 15 areas now. And by the way, we do have a virtual area. We do. We put one in, and I don't know, was that I wasn't there. Was that unanimous, Laura?
It was unanimous.
It was unanimous. So we do have a virtual area, and and that's just sort of the way we are. And anyway, I'd like to thank Matt and Danny. And I guess I'm turning over the time.